A broken clock exposed everything the town tried to hide. Elsa Mornay hadn't stepped foot in Windvale for over a decade, not since she left behind the fog-drenched streets and creaking pine woods for a career in the city. But the news of her grandfather's passing, sudden, unexplained, and solitary, had drawn her back like a tide pulling against a struggling swimmer. When she arrived at the base of the mountains, the town greeted her with the familiar chill of damp stone and the uneasy hush of a place that seemed preserved in time. The old watch shop, nestled between a shuttered bakery and a disused cinema, stood exactly as she remembered. The paint faded, the wooden trim flaking like parchment. But something about it felt different now. Lifeless. Still, inside, the air was thick with dust and oil, the scent of brass gears and varnished wood clinging to every surface. She stepped carefully between towering glass cases filled with timepieces of every kind. Grandfather clocks with carved faces, tiny jeweled wristwatches, brass carriage clocks ticking no more. All of them had stopped. And not randomly. Every single clock in the shop displayed the same time, 3:17. The discovery sent a cold ripple up Elsa's spine. She checked her phone to ensure it wasn't some odd coincidence. It wasn't. Something was wrong. Her grandfather had always been a meticulous man, obsessed with time almost to a fault. When she was little, she remembered him adjusting her toy clock to the second, muttering things like, "Time deserves respect," and even, "Seconds have meaning." She had dismissed it then as harmless eccentricity, but seeing his life's work frozen at one exact moment felt less like coincidence and more like a message. She didn't believe in omens, but she also didn't believe in accidents. As she explored the shop, she noticed that his beloved pet raven, Ticker, was still there in his cage by the dusty window, alive and healthy. The bird cocked its head and let out a garbled mimicry of a sound that resembled her grandfather's voice. Broken phrases like tick-tock, and something that sounded eerily like it wasn't time. Elsa stepped back. The bird flapped once and then went still. The words hung in the air like smoke. Later that evening, while clearing the back room, Elsa stumbled upon a hidden drawer beneath the workbench. Inside was a worn, leather-bound journal, one she didn't remember seeing before. The first few pages were normal enough. Repair logs, customer notes, bits of philosophical musing. But the final entries grew erratic, scribbled, almost manic. One page read, "She's still missing. Time is lying." Another had the phrase, 3:17. The moment truth was silenced, underlined 3 times in red ink. Elsa's heart raced. She didn't know who she was or what had happened at 3:17, but she felt something stir in her chest, a sense that her grandfather hadn't died peacefully in his sleep, as the town claimed. The next morning, she walked through the narrow streets of Windvale, past the churchyard and up the cobbled path to the mayor's office. Mayor Thorne Ainsley greeted her with practiced warmth and an embrace that felt both familiar and performative. "Your grandfather was a pillar of this community," he said. "Quiet, devoted. We all miss him terribly." His office walls were lined with photographs, awards, war medals, smiling townspeople standing next to him in various seasons. There was even a photo of him cutting the ribbon at the town's rebuilt bridge, the one destroyed in a landslide decades ago. Elsa mentioned the clocks. All stopped at 3:17. The mayor laughed it off. That old shop was always quirky. He probably meant it as a joke. But Elsa wasn't so sure. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Something about the way he said "always quirky" felt too dismissive, like he wanted to shift her attention elsewhere. That night, Elsa returned to the shop with a growing sense of unease. As she passed the wall of silent clocks, she paused in front of one in particular, a gift she had made for her grandfather when she was 10. It was crude and colorful, the gears misaligned, but he had kept it on display like it was a treasure. It too read 3:17. Something had happened at that time, something deliberate, and her grandfather, meticulous to the end, had ensured every last clock bore witness to it. Alone in the dim glow of the workbench lamp, Elsa opened the journal again. A phrase she had overlooked earlier jumped out at her now. If time is the body, memory is the wound. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but the wound had been opened, and the bleeding had only just begun. Elsa didn't sleep much after her second night in Windvale. Her dreams were fractured, full of ticking sounds that echoed endlessly and shadows that seemed to move behind glass. The phrase, "if time is the body, memory is the wound," repeated in her mind like a haunting refrain. By morning, she was back in the shop, coffee in hand, flipping through her grandfather's journal, searching for meaning in the scribbles. It wasn't just the clocks. Something had unraveled in her grandfather's last days, something no one wanted to speak about. She began cataloging the journal entries by date, tracing the deterioration of his handwriting and the growing paranoia in his words. One entry stood out, dated only 2 weeks before his death. It read, her voice came through again, same time, 3:17. It always starts with the ticking. Her? Elsa had no memory of another woman in his life. Her grandmother had passed away long before she was born. This was never named, but the references to her became more intense. Cryptic notes about lost time, silence, betrayal. Elsa began to wonder if this, her, was real, or some imagined figure haunting the edges of a crumbling mind. Still, there was something too consistent about it all to dismiss as delusion. Elsa decided she needed answers from someone who knew him better in his final days. She visited the town's only nursing aide, Mara Bell, who had checked in on her grandfather weekly. Mara was in her 50s, thin as a matchstick, and spoke like every word cost her something. When Elsa brought up the journals, Mara hesitated, her eyes flicking to the window. "He started talking to the clocks," she said quietly, but not like a crazy man. More like he was listening, like they were telling him things. What kinds of things? He'd say things like, "She's still trapped," or "They stopped her before she could speak again." I thought it was grief or guilt. But now? She shook her head. "Now I'm not sure. After he died, I went back once, just to tidy up. Every clock had stopped, same time. I didn't tell anyone, didn't want to be part of whatever that was." Elsa's heart pounded. She thanked Mara and left, but the questions multiplied. Who was the she in the journal? What happened at 3:17? Why would someone want to silence her? Later that day, Elsa returned to the mayor's office under the pretense of accessing public archives. She claimed she wanted to donate her grandfather's collection to the town's historical society and needed context on local events around the time of his passing. The mayor agreed easily, but lingered too long near her, watching her fingers skim the records. As she sifted through old newspapers and town bulletins, she stumbled upon a front-page photo from 15 years ago. A younger Mayor Ainsley standing beside a smiling teenage girl. The caption read, "Newcomer Cassia Wren wins Windvale Essay Contest." Elsa's breath caught. The girl had sharp, intelligent eyes and a wary smile. Cassia Wren. The name stirred something, though she couldn't place it. Flipping through the following months of clippings, Elsa found something troubling. Cassia's name appeared a few more times, awarded a scholarship, praised for volunteer work, then disappeared entirely. No graduation photo, no mention of moving away, nothing. It was as if she had vanished. Elsa checked town directories and school records. No transfer, no obituary. Cassia Wren had simply stopped existing. That night, she brought the journal out again, scanning for any possible link. She found it near the back, almost illegible. CW tried to reset the silence. They punished her, we all felt it. But time won't forget. Cassia Wren. It had to be, somehow, her grandfather was tied to her disappearance. But in what way? And why would he record it only in riddles? Elsa couldn't escape the feeling that Windvale was hiding something far darker than it appeared. She took her questions to the only person who had ever dared challenge the town's authority. Theo Marin, a former journalist turned recluse after a failed expose on Windvale's police chief. He lived just outside town in a sagging cottage that smelled of damp books and dust. When she mentioned her grandfather, the clocks, and the name Cassia Wren, Theo paled. "I remember her," he said. "Smart kid. Too curious. She used to ask questions about town records, the bridge collapse, the sealed archives in the courthouse basement. Next thing I know, she's gone. No word, no farewell. Not even a missing persons report." "Sealed archives?" Theo nodded. "They say it's old flood damage records, stuff no one needs anymore. But I've heard whispers it holds more than that, things the town once buried." That night, under cover of darkness, Elsa and Theo crept into the courthouse. The building creaked like a restless sleeper. They found the basement unlocked, but a heavy iron door barred their path. It had no keyhole, only a strange indentation in the shape of an hourglass. Elsa pulled her grandfather's journal from her bag and flipped to a folded page taped to the back cover. It contained a crude drawing of an identical hourglass and a sequence of times: 104, 211, 317, 403. Below it, a phrase: "Only in sequence do we remember." Theo speculated that the times were a code. They tried pressing parts of the door in a pattern matching clock positions: 104 just past 1, then 211, and so on. After several tries, a click echoed through the dark. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow chamber, lined with steel file drawers and one central cabinet, labeled Event W13. Elsa pulled the file with trembling hands. Inside were transcripts, photos, and sealed testimonies, all about Cassia Wren. She had discovered discrepancies in the town's rebuilding funds after the bridge collapse. She had been preparing to release her findings at a community forum. The night before the event, she disappeared. The file revealed a chilling detail. Her last known conversation was with Mayor Ainsley. Witnesses said she left his office distressed and afraid. There were records of an emergency town council vote the following week. All notes from that session were redacted, and Cassia's name was never mentioned again in official records. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was an erasure. Elsa felt the walls closing in. Her grandfather hadn't just kept quiet. He had witnessed this. He had been part of the silencing, or perhaps tried to stop it. The stopped clocks, the phrase, "Time is lying," the exact minute they all froze. It was the moment Cassia vanished, 3:17. As she and Theo stepped out into the cold night, Elsa's head throbbed with questions and guilt. Her grandfather had been part of a cover-up, perhaps unwillingly, but complicit nonetheless. The journal had been his attempt to leave breadcrumbs, to preserve the truth when he could no longer speak it openly. But if someone in Windvale had gone to such lengths to bury the past, they wouldn't let Elsa expose it now. When she returned to the shop, she found it ransacked. Drawers pulled open, glass shattered, the raven's cage empty. Ticker was gone. Then she noticed something on the wall. One clock, the one she'd made as a child, had been reset. It now reads 3:18, 1 minute later. Someone had been there, and they had changed time. Elsa felt her grip on certainty start to fracture. Had she opened something that couldn't be closed again? What if Cassia was still alive, trapped in a life forced into silence? Or worse, what if Cassia had become something else entirely? The ghost in the gears of Windvale, whispering through clocks and ravens, trying to tell the truth in the only way left to her. And now Elsa was listening.
The morning after the break-in, Elsa stood in the ruins of the clock shop, overwhelmed by a rising tide of dread. Broken glass glittered like ice across the floor. The shelves were emptied, drawers thrown open like gaping mouths. Whoever had come wasn't looking for money. They were looking for information, for silence. But the most chilling discovery wasn't the mess. It was the single clock left untouched, her childhood creation, now ticking steadily at 3:18. 1 minute past the time every other clock had stopped. 1 minute passed when Cassia had disappeared. The message was clear. Someone else knew. Elsa gathered what remained of the journal and secured it in her coat. She didn't have time to clean or mourn the destruction. She had a file of damning evidence hidden in her grandfather's old piano bench upstairs, and a gut feeling that someone was watching her now. The curtains across the street twitched. A black car idled near the corner, too long to be casual. Theo called an hour later. "Someone's been to my place too," he said. "They took my laptop and all my notes, but they left this." He paused. "A cassette tape, just one, no label. I don't even own a player." Elsa's heart jumped. "I do. There's one in the basement here, part of the antique collection." She didn't mention how strange it felt, like the tape was meant to be brought to her. Theo arrived shortly after, carrying the cassette in gloved hands. They descended into the clock shop's basement, where old mechanical parts shared space with dusty radios, phonographs, and yes, a small grey cassette player from the late 80s. Elsa clicked the tape in. It whirred, then clicked. For a moment, nothing. Then a girl's voice crackled through. "If you're hearing this, they haven't destroyed everything. My name is Cassia Wren. I don't know if I'm still alive, but my memory is. Please, don't let them bury me again." Elsa froze. Theo leaned closer as Cassia's voice continued, shaken but urgent. "They said I saw too much, that if I spoke, the town would fall apart. But the truth is, it's already rotten. They took the money meant to rebuild after the bridge collapse, funneled it into private projects, bought silence, made threats. I was going to speak. I had proof. The night before the town forum, Mayor Ainsley asked to meet me in secret. He said he wanted to make things right, but when I arrived, he wasn't alone." A pause, a low, rattling breath. "They locked me in the old cold storage facility, said it was temporary, but days passed, then weeks. No sunlight, only the ticking of old industrial timers. I began to lose track of time. I wrote messages on scraps, marked walls with my fingernails. I thought someone would find me, but they never did." The tape crackled again, a sound like metal scraping. "I heard footsteps one night. A voice, an old man. He couldn't break in, but he spoke to me through the vent. He told me his name was Abram, and that he used to fix clocks. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't stopped them. He promised he would remember. That time would not lie forever." Elsa's breath caught, her grandfather. Cassia's voice faded after that. A mechanical click ended the message. Theo sat back in stunned silence. "She's alive," Elsa whispered, or was. "If that tape is real, the cold storage building must be where she was kept." Theo nodded grimly. That place was condemned years ago, but no one ever checked it properly. The records were sealed. They wasted no time. Bundled in thick coats and armed with a crowbar, flashlight, and backup batteries, they approached the cold storage facility on the outskirts of town. A rusting chain-link fence barely stood guard anymore. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, like the building had absorbed decades of silence. Inside, their footsteps echoed sharply against concrete. Rows of rusted lockers lined the walls, doors half hanging from hinges. The structure groaned under its own weight. "There," Elsa said, pointing to a room near the back with heavy steel plating around the door. The flashlight caught something scratched into the metal. Overlapping tally marks. Hundreds, maybe thousands. She touched the handle. Locked. Theo wedged the crowbar into the side, gritting his teeth. It took several tries, the sound of wrenching metal deafening in the silence. Then, a snap. The door creaked open. The room inside was small, no larger than a closet. Mold lined the walls, the smell of rust and old grief filled their lungs. In the corner, beneath a torn blanket, was a bundle of papers, an old recorder, and a cracked mirror. No person, just absence. Elsa sifted through the papers. Her hands trembled as she realized they were journal entries, dated daily from the weeks Cassia had been trapped. Some were coherent, others rambling. One page read, "Tick, tick, tick, they tried to erase me, but memory is the wound and time bleeds." Cassia had written herself into the walls, into time itself. There was no body, no bones. But in the dust, Elsa found something odd, a raven feather, sleek, black, and fresh. "Titika," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. Ravens don't live in places like this, not without food, warmth, reason. Then the recorder clicked on, by itself. Cassia's voice returned, faint but unmistakable. "If you found this, I'm not gone. Not really. I left the past behind, but it follows all of us. Time doesn't forget, but you can make others remember. Please, tell them." The message ended. Theo stepped back, shaken. "We can't keep this quiet." "I won't," Elsa said. "I'm going to publish everything, the file, the tape, the journal. If Windvale has any decency left, it'll listen. But Windvale didn't listen. Not right away. When Elsa published the story online using Theo's old blog, it spread fast. First in whispers, then in outrage. The mayor denied it all, called it a hoax. But the evidence was too detailed, too real. Journalists arrived. Protests sparked in front of the courthouse. Maribel came forward and confirmed that Abram had told her he was trying to fix time, a metaphor no one had understood until now. Still, something hung over the town like a curse. Clocks began failing across Windvale. Phones froze at 3:17. Watch batteries died. It was as if time itself had cracked, unable to bear the weight of a buried truth. Elsa returned to the shop one last time. She reset the clocks, cleaned what she could, hung the hourglass key above the doorway, a reminder that silence doesn't heal. Memory does. Then, just as she turned to leave, she heard it, the flutter of wings. Ticker landed on the counter, eyes locked with hers. Around its leg was a strip of paper. She unraveled it. A new note in the same handwriting as the old journal. She watches still, through the gears, through you. Thank you. Elsa smiled, eyes stinging with tears. Cassia hadn't vanished. She had become part of the ticking. And now, Windvale would never forget again. The snow came early that winter. By mid-November, Windvale was blanketed in white, and the cold seemed sharper, more deliberate, as if the town itself was holding its breath. News outlets continued cycling through the story Elsa had released, and though Mayor Ainsley still denied every word, the court of public opinion had shifted. People who had once looked the other way now stared uncomfortably at the truth they'd helped ignore. But Elsa wasn't interested in vindication anymore. Not exactly. Her focus had turned inward toward healing what had been broken, starting with her own sense of time. She reopened her grandfather's shop, repairing one clock at a time, offering free restoration work to anyone who brought in a broken timepiece. The townspeople began to trickle in, some with heirlooms, others with excuses. It just stopped working, one woman said of her pocket watch. Maybe it's time it told the truth. They never said Cassia's name out loud, but Elsa could feel it on their lips. One day, Maribel visited. The former music teacher looked thinner, warier, but her eyes were clear. She placed a velvet-wrapped bundle on the counter. Inside was a carved metronome, its wood warped, its beat uneven. It was hers, Mara whispered. She used it in class. When she vanished, I kept it. Couldn't throw it out, couldn't listen to it either. Elsa carefully began restoring it. When she opened the casing, she found something wedged behind the mechanism, a folded scrap of music paper, a single line of melody with the words, "Memory keeps time even when clocks do not." Later that evening, Elsa wound the metronome and let it tick in the quiet of the shop. It beat steadily at 60 BPM, a perfect human resting heartbeat. She closed her eyes and listened. For a moment, it was as if Cassia was still in the room. But peace would not come so easily. That same night, Theo arrived breathless, holding a new envelope, unsigned, delivered anonymously. Inside were printed photos, grainy images from a town hall security feed. One showed Cassia the night she vanished, entering through a back door. Another showed someone following her. Not Ainsley, not a stranger. It was Maribel. Elsa stared at the image in disbelief. "That's impossible. Mara helped me. She brought the metronome." Theo interrupted, voice low. "Look at the timestamp. 10 minutes before Cassia's last message to her roommate. Mara was there. She lied about not seeing Cassia that day." Elsa sat down heavily. "You think she was part of it?" "I think she might have been used. Or maybe she believed she was protecting Cassia from something worse. Either way, we need to confront her." They didn't go to her home. Instead, they waited until she came back to the shop to pick up the restored metronome. She walked in with a familiar air of practiced calm, a music teacher's grace. But when Elsa placed the photos on the counter, her face changed. Not surprise, regret. "I suppose you found the rest of the story," she said quietly. Elsa didn't answer, just waited. Mara reached into her coat and pulled out a small flash drive. "There's a video on here. It was recorded the night she disappeared. I held on to it for years. Couldn't destroy it, couldn't watch it either." Elsa and Theo huddled around the old computer in the back room. The screen flickered to life. The footage was dim, but clear enough. Cassia sat in a dim chamber, not the cold storage room, but an office. Mayor Ainsley paced nearby, visibly agitated. Mara stood in the background. arms crossed, conflicted. "You don't understand," Ainsley hissed. "If this gets out, Windvale collapses, businesses leave, families suffer, your noble stand will ruin everyone." Cassia replied, voice steady. "People are already suffering, they just don't know who's responsible." Mara stepped forward. "Cassia, please, if you release that file now, they'll destroy you. You won't survive this." Cassia turned toward her. "You already chose their side, didn't you?" The tape ended with a final exchange. "I won't be your scapegoat," Cassia said. "You already are," Ainsley replied. Then static. Elsa exhaled shakily. This is everything." Theo looked at Mara, whose face was pale. "Why did you keep this?" "Because I couldn't undo what I'd done," she whispered. "I was trying to protect her in my own cowardly way. I told myself if I just watched over the town, if I just made sure she wasn't forgotten, it would balance out. But it never did." Elsa stood slowly. "You're going to testify?" "I will." The weeks that followed were nothing short of a reckoning. With Mara's testimony and the video evidence, state investigators descended on Windvale. Mayor Ainsley was arrested on charges of conspiracy, unlawful detention, and destruction of evidence. Others followed. Officials who had hidden behind silence were brought into the light. But perhaps the most profound change wasn't legal. It was emotional. Windvale began holding a yearly Day of Memory, where townspeople brought clocks, watches, and timepieces to the square and let them tick together at precisely 3:18 p.m., a symbolic acknowledgement that time had been wounded, but now ran freely again. Elsa, now the quiet steward of that tradition, rang a brass bell to mark the start of each year's remembrance. The first year, someone brought a mural, Cassia's face painted across the side of the old cold storage building, eyes lifted toward the sky, surrounded by ravens. Theo turned his blog into a public archive of the case. He interviewed whistleblowers, advocates, and survivors of institutional silence across the country. The story of Windvale spread far and wide, a cautionary tale, but also a map to healing. And Elsa? She kept fixing clocks. Not because they needed her, but because time did. Because every gear that turned, every hand that moved forward, felt like resistance to the forces that had once tried to make the world forget. On the anniversary of Cassia's disappearance, a young girl walked into the shop. She couldn't have been more than 8. In her hands was a broken egg timer. "It used to belong to my mom," she said. "She says it doesn't work anymore, but I think maybe it's just lonely." Elsa smiled and took it gently. "Well, let's help it remember how to count again." As the girl wandered the shelves, Ticker flew in through the open door and landed on the counter, its wings flecked with snow. It stared at Elsa for a long moment, then blinked slowly, like an old friend keeping watch. Elsa leaned down to wind the egg timer. Click, tick, tick, and time, once more, began to heal.